As a devoted wife married to a family heir, I had dedicated myself fully. Then my husband declared,
My young girlfriend just had my baby, so get out.
Don't worry, I'll support Brian.
sure, the man I had supported with all my might betrayed me, and now a young woman stood before me holding his baby. I decided to throw everything away. At this point, my feeling of liberation was stronger than my anger of betrayal. 3 days later,
Do you realize who you just kicked out?
Our family is doomed now.
What?
the heavy voices of my in-laws and Brian's clueless reply echoed through the room. I was too dumbfounded to even respond. I had thought he was just an old-fashioned, overly patriarchal husband, but it turned out he had no understanding of his position or responsibilities. It's too late for regrets now. The only path left for Brian is one of complete loss. He'll have plenty of time to regret all the cruel things he's done to me. My name is Mia Smith. I'm 40 years old. I met Brian, my husband, through an arranged marriage. He wanted me to quit my job and be a full-time homemaker, but I insisted on continuing my accounting job, even if part-time, and convinced him. Thanks to that, I'm still working in accounting. Brian, the son of a company president and heir apparent, was working toward becoming the next CEO. His ideal was for me to support him while he pursued his career. He was never happy about my part-time work, but I enjoyed my current job and couldn't see myself becoming a full-time homemaker, so I took advantage of having convinced him and continued working. Even so, I did my best to be a supportive wife to the family heir. And yet, I never imagined I'd face such betrayal.
I'm home. What's for dinner?
I'll heat it up now.
I told you I was coming home. Why isn't it ready to eat? I'm letting you work because you insisted, so make sure you handle the housework properly.
Here we go again. Standing in the kitchen, I sighed quietly so Brian wouldn't notice. He clearly wanted me to be a homemaker, and he never missed a chance to make snide comments about my part-time job. He prided himself on being the heir and working hard, yet dumped all the housework on me without lifting a finger to help. Worse, he even seemed to go out of his way to make housework more difficult.
Hey, don't look so tired. You wanted to work, so don't bring your work stress home.
I'm not tired. It's fine. Dinner will be ready soon.
Seriously, I'm the one who's actually exhausted.
As Brian grumbled, I rushed to get dinner on the table. It's true that I genuinely enjoy my job, and it's also true that he's the heir to his family's company. I understand that his work carries more responsibility than mine, and that he must be exhausted. So I held back my retorts and silently did what he asked.
By the way, I'm going on a business trip next week. You've prepared everything, right?
What? You didn't tell me. Okay, I'll get it ready.
You should already know my schedule. Prepare gifts ready for my clients.
But Brian never shared the details of his work schedule, making it impossible to anticipate his needs. There's no way I could know that unless you told me.
If you just pay attention when I talk or ask my parents, you'd know. If you can't even do that, don't bother working, it's a nuisance.
That's not fair. His demands were completely unreasonable. I wasn't a mind reader, and both my parents and his refrained from meddling in our marriage out of respect. Whenever I stopped by their house, they always welcomed me warmly. However, they seemed to firmly believe that young people dislike interference from the elderly. Smiling, they would say that young people probably get along better with each other, and share similar opinions. I had thought about asking for advice many times, but I didn't want to disregard their kindness. Besides, it felt embarrassing to bring up such petty arguments as an adult.
Make sure everything is ready by Monday.
With that, Brian left his empty plate on the table and headed to the bathroom. I was a little fed up with his dishes left on the table, his preparations for his business trip, his daily meals. I felt more like his mother than his wife. Of course, it's probably part of a wife's duties, but with Brian's self-centered behavior, it only amplifies the feeling of being a mother. How many times have I thought to myself, why is a grown man acting like a rebellious teenager? Even the gifts for his business trips were always left entirely up to me. If he didn't like what I chose, he'd berate me for it. Ryan has only ever complained about my choice of gifts, but once, when we visited his parents, the gift I had chosen was apparently well received by his clients. He then bragged about it to his parents as if it were entirely his own achievement.
If you just talk to the clients a little, you'd know exactly what kind of gifts they'd like.
Ryan boasted, even though he didn't even know where those gifts were sold. I sighed at his shameless arrogance. I was certain he treated successes as his own accomplishments, while failures were blamed on me. How many nights will the business trip last?
2 nights. Why don't you know that already?
I see. I'm sorry. I wanted to ask why he thought I could know without being told. Still, I apologized to Brian. Dealing with his bad mood would be too troublesome otherwise.
How can you not handle this? This is why you should have been a full-time housewife. Honestly, we could live just fine on my income alone, but you're embarrassing me.
I silently endured Brian's complaints. They were practically his catchphrase at this point. Brian seemed to feel that my working was a subtle insult to his ability to provide. No matter how many times I refuted this, he would always bring up money eventually. Perhaps his pride as the next CEO drove this insecurity. His parents had never mentioned money or my job, so it was clearly Brian's own hang-up. His fixation on money made me feel as if I was at fault for working just because I wanted to. I tolerated the current situation because I liked my job and worked part-time, but if not for that, I might have given up and become a housewife long ago. Regardless of my fatigue from juggling housework and my job, Brian kept making demands. Occasionally, he'd even suggest dates, but since his plans always revolved around his own desires and schedule, I often found them exhausting.
We're going to see a movie this Saturday, and I've already made dinner reservations. Looking forward to it, right?
Yes, thank you. In truth, I was hoping to rest over the weekend since work had been hectic. But saying that would only upset Brian, and he might tell me to quit my job again. So I swallowed my words and forced a smile to keep the peace.
I do so much for you, but you can't even have a child.
I'm sorry. That's something we can't control. Recently, he blamed my infertility and seemed to want to blame it on my work. Still, I couldn't help but laugh at his claim of doing so much. All Brian ever did was impose his will on me, and any so-called acts of kindness were purely for his own satisfaction. He never once asked about my schedule.
Maybe your hormones are off balance because of your job. That's why we still don't have a grandchild to show my parents.
I'm sorry. I'll go for another checkup next week. When I apologized, Brian's mood would improve, and he dropped the subject for a while. That's why I had developed a habit of apologizing immediately whenever he scolded me. It shortened each individual lecture, but it felt like the overall frequency of his complaints was increasing. Was he enjoying the sight of me apologizing?
Most men who earn as much as I do would expect their wives to be full-time homemakers. Don't forget that I'm letting you work because I'm so generous.
Of course. I wondered if I had handled that wrong, but avoiding his anger seemed more important. In Brian's world, everything revolved around him. He seemed to view me as a convenient maid, someone he looked after out of obligation. Even the occasional dates felt more like walking a dog than spending time with a partner. He only did it because he felt he had to, and he indulged in the idea that this made him noble. It was a real nuisance for me. Despite claiming we could live comfortably on his income alone, Brian demanded that I contribute to household expenses since I worked part-time. This even included the cost of dining out, like the restaurants he booked without consulting me.
Pay the bill. I'll wait outside.
All right. His actions contradicted his words so much that I didn't know what to think anymore. If he truly believed his income was enough, there'd be no need to include my earnings in the household budget. But according to Brian, because I enjoyed working and neglected housework, my hobby income should go toward the household as an apology. It wasn't that I minded contributing financially. What I couldn't stand was the way he complained about how unnecessary my income was while still taking my money. If he hated it so much, he should refuse my contributions entirely. But instead, our finances were split almost evenly.
This place was decent. Not worth the price, though.
I thought it was a lovely restaurant.
Well, your poor taste probably makes this place seem good enough for you.
With each passing day, Brian became less concerned about hiding his condescending attitude toward me. Even so, he continued to take me out on weekends under the guise of a date, likely because of his need to keep up appearances. He hated the idea of people saying, "That husband doesn't even let his wife relax," knowing I only commuted between work and home. He probably also couldn't stand the thought of his coworkers gossiping about him not treating his wife well. Whenever I met people from Brian's company, he would act as though he deeply cared for me, completely unlike his usual self. I found his shallow performance increasingly intolerable. Honestly, I didn't think my marriage was working out. I found myself feeling frustrated more often, and many times I felt more at ease at work than at home. I had slowly begun to consider our divorce. When I returned home from my part-time job, my evenings were busier than my time at work. I had to do all the grocery shopping, fold the laundry, cook dinner, and finish all the household chores in the morning and evening while Brian was at the office. I've told him so many times to empty his pockets. As I hastily folded the laundry, I pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from Brian's pocket and frowned. Even small things like this would end up being blamed on me, which only added to my frustration. I picked up the card-like piece of stiff paper, which turned out to be something resembling a loyalty card adorned with garish pink hearts. This is. I looked up the address on my phone and discovered it was a loyalty card for a hotel. Of course, it was a hotel I'd never been to, and the points on the card had been updated quite recently. Lately, Brian had been talking to me less on weekends and evenings, which I had naively thought gave me more time to rest. It turned out he was likely seeing another woman. What a betrayal. Anger welled up as I processed this new reality. I had endured his oppressive attitude and unreasonable demands, doing my best to be a devoted wife. Sure, I continued working part-time, but I never once asked Brian to share the housework. The money I earned wasn't for my personal use, it went toward household expenses. I ordered or cooked the meals he wanted, paid for the restaurants he reserved without asking me, and even covered half the cost of the gifts he needed for work. Despite being told it was a wife's duty to support her husband, I was constantly berated for not buying better gifts, forcing me to exceed the budget he provided to choose something more suitable. Why did I deserve such treatment after all that? I quietly slipped the battered card back into Brian's pants pocket. Normally, if I left anything in his pockets and it went through the wash, it would be treated as my negligence. This time, however, Brian said nothing, likely because he knew he was caught. Even though his affair had almost been exposed, Brian's attitude remained unchanged, showing no signs of kindness toward me. As for myself, a week passed without finding any clarity or closure, grappling with the betrayal of the husband I had desperately tried to support. One day, Brian called me.
Come to the restaurant near the house right now. Don't forget your wallet.
It wasn't unusual for Brian to suddenly suggest eating out. Not thinking much of it, I grabbed my wallet and headed to the restaurant, annoyed at the thought of another expense. I'm here to meet someone.
This way, please.
The quiet French restaurant was one of Brian's favorites in the neighborhood. Though pricey, it offered excellent service and food, making it perfect for someone as image-conscious as him.
You're late. Sit down.
Well, a young woman was sitting next to Brian. She was holding a baby in her arms. The two of them smirked at me mockingly. As the waiter showed me to my seat, she quickly retreated to the kitchen as if to avoid the scene.
I have something to tell you. Sit down.
All right. Since discovering the hotel loyalty card, I had braced myself for this moment. I quietly took my seat and faced Brian and the woman, who was presumably his mistress. With a smug grin, Brian spoke.
My young girlfriend just had my baby, so you get out.
Don't worry, I'll take care of Brian.
Sure. When my reaction didn't match what Brian had anticipated, his expression turned noticeably sour.
Do you even understand? I'm going to remarry Kate, so you and I are getting a divorce.
So it seems. Is this Kate? Does she work at your company? I turned to look at Kate, who stared back at me with a triumphant glint in her eyes, holding the baby in her arms. She appeared to be at least a decade younger than me. It wouldn't surprise me if their relationship started when she first joined the company.
I can't stay with someone like you who can't even have kids. I'm starting over with Kate, so you can just work and live alone.
Once we're married, I plan to leave my job and dedicate myself to supporting Brian, unlike Mia.
Did Brian hold off on divorcing me until Kate got pregnant and had a baby? If so, it means she gave birth as an unwed mother. It's strange that this didn't become gossip at their company. Since she's planning to become a homemaker, it's possible she quit her job when the pregnancy was discovered. If that's the case, Brian could have brought up divorce when she left the company. Various doubts flashed through my mind in an instant. The most likely scenario was that the story about having a baby was fabricated. If someone at the company had become an unwed mother, the news would have surely reached Brian's parents, especially if there were procedures for childbirth, child rearing, or resignation. Given Brian's careless approach to his affair, as evidenced by the hotel loyalty card I found, it's hard to believe seasoned colleagues wouldn't have noticed his infidelity before it reached this point. I considered pointing it out, but decided against it to avoid the hassle. Instead, I discreetly activated the voice recorder on my phone, ensuring Brian and Kate wouldn't notice. I'm sorry to trouble you. Kate, when did you meet Brian? I must have been quite a nuisance to you.
Well, yeah. But since you were already married to Brian, I had to tolerate it for a while.
I see. So it's been over a year since you two started dating? When I humbled myself, Kate and Brian eagerly began talking about their actions. Apparently, they started dating 3 years ago and believed they were destined for each other, overcoming the obstacle of me to be together. Unaware that I was recording the conversation, they openly shared their story, which only encouraged me to ask more questions. Normally, this would raise suspicions, but they seemed to enjoy my submissive demeanor and felt no need to question it.
Now you get it. There's nothing you can do to compete with Kate. You're just a washed-up old lady. You're useless now, so get out of my house now.
Understood. Having gathered all the information I needed, I accepted the divorce papers Brian had already filled out. As a gesture of goodwill, I signed the papers in front of them. I'll make sure to file this, perhaps because I remained submissive throughout. They didn't question my intentions and agreed to my suggestion.
Be strong and live your life alone from now on.
Kate sneered at me until the very end, her expression full of contempt. I smiled at her. With this, I was finally free from everything I had endured. The sense of liberation far outweighed any anger I felt over their betrayal. I walked home with such a light step it felt like skipping. Of course, I didn't pay for the meal. When Brian told me to cover the bill, I pretended to take the receipt and left it behind. There was no reason to pay for the meal of someone I was about to divorce. 3 days later, after I had returned to my parents' home, Brian called me. Hello, what is it?
Get back to the house right now. Stop wasting time.
His sudden shouting made my ears ring. His tone was more overbearing than ever, and I couldn't help but feel irritated. You're the one who told me to leave and get out of the house after the divorce. Why should I come back now?
Don't talk back to me. Just come back now.
It was pointless to argue. Honestly, I didn't want to go, but if I didn't, he'd keep calling. Worst case scenario, he might even show up at my parents' house. To avoid that, with a deep sigh, I gave in to his demand. I'm no longer working part-time, so I won't be able to come until after 6 p.m.
What? Get here earlier. I have.
Goodbye. Cutting him off mid-sentence, I ended the call. How long does he plan to treat me like his servant? I was too exasperated for words. He can regret this all he wants. It was likely his parents had said something to him, which explained his panic. But it was too late for that now. The only path left for Brian was one of ruin. True to my word, I headed to Brian's house after 6 p.m. Hello. I greeted quietly as I stepped into the entryway. From inside the house, I heard the voice of my father-in-law, Robert.
Do you even realize who you kicked out?
Our family is doomed now.
What?
The heavy voices of my in-laws clashed with Brian's clueless response. Kate was likely inside as well. I didn't hear the sound of a baby crying. It didn't seem likely the baby was simply asleep. As I suspected, the claim of her pregnancy and childbirth was likely a fabrication.
Wait a second. Why would the family fall apart just because she left? She's just some part-time lady, isn't she?
I've already told you that Nia's family is one of our business partners. How could you call her just a part-time lady after hearing that?
My mother-in-law, Susan, let out a voice that was almost a scream. Well, she wasn't wrong. Even I was too stunned to respond. I had assumed Brian was just an old-fashioned, authoritarian husband, but this showed he didn't understand either of our positions. Then again, I'd suspected he had little understanding, but I hadn't anticipated he was this ignorant.
Mia stopped working part-time after the divorce and now holds a managerial position at her company. She's responsible for accounting there. While she was part-time for a while, that was thanks to you.
Susan let out a heavy sigh as Robert spoke. Well, it was true. Because of my divorce, my part-time stint ended sooner than expected. I couldn't help but chuckle at Robert's ironic tone. Thanks to him, I was now slated for a promotion soon, as originally planned before I got married. I didn't want to think of this situation as being Brian's doing, but framing it that way would certainly make him more upset. As expected of Robert, Robert knew his son well.
Mia will soon be involved in managing her company, and because of your actions that damaged her credibility, it wouldn't be surprising if her company cut ties with ours.
Why? Work and personal life are separate. Anyone who mixes the two is incompetent.
Coming from someone who got involved with a coworker, that argument holds no weight.
Robert's retort was spot on. Brian faltered under his father's fierce tone, struggling to find words. Given his knack for self-justification, he was likely coming up with some weak excuses. But none of them would be enough to silence Robert. It was only natural. Robert was an old-school businessman with a strong sense of justice and loyalty. Brian's shallow excuses would be dismissed in a single breath.
I plan to impose penalties on both of you and formally apologize to Mia. But whether she'll forgive us is another matter.
This time, Kate's shrill voice rang out.
Why should I be punished? I didn't do anything wrong. If the heir to a company approaches you, who wouldn't say yes?
I heard you were incredibly disrespectful to Mia at that restaurant. You've caused just as much damage to the company as Brian.
That's not fair.
It seemed like the conversation wouldn't progress unless I stepped in. While listening to the two of them panic was amusing, continuing this charade would make me no better than them. Resolving to act, I called out again and entered the house. Excuse me, I'm sorry for being late.
No, we're the ones who should apologize for troubling you.
We deeply regret the inconvenience we've caused.
As soon as I entered the room, Robert and Susan both apologized. Meanwhile, Brian and Kate glared at me with resentment, creating a stark contrast. I maintained a calm demeanor and addressed the couple. Please don't apologize. Neither of you is at fault. I imagine you're concerned about the business partnership, but work and personal matters are separate. I wouldn't let this affect business dealings. At that moment, Brian's face lit up, as if he'd been vindicated.
Of course. You've never had kids, you don't do housework, and you've only caused us trouble. Mom and Dad are worrying over nothing.
Shut up.
Robert's sharp rebuke immediately stopped Brian, who had been riding high. Honestly, I wished he would learn to read the room better. The fact that Brian and I even had an arranged marriage was because of the business relationship between our families. Since both families had children of similar ages, the idea came up. But as Robert had pointed out, my family's company was the larger one. From Robert's tone, it was clear that losing this partnership, or even just reducing business with us, would be a severe blow to their company. potentially even putting it at risk of bankruptcy.
Do you understand that you've brought our company to the brink of collapse?
I had never seen Robert, usually so mild-mannered, this angry before. His voice was lower and more menacing than ever, brimming with fury. Even Brian, his son, seemed unaccustomed to seeing his father this enraged. But the next moment, Brian appeared to shake off his fear, his expression hardening as he raised his voice in defiance.
That doesn't matter. I'll make the company successful without needing any business with hers.
Such confidence. He has twice as much confidence and self-affirmation as others. It would be his talent to show it in this situation. Like me, Robert seemed to have passed the stage of anger and moved on to astonishment.
What are you saying? You didn't even realize Mia is the daughter of one of our key business partners until now. There's no way you can pull this off.
While Robert raised his voice in frustration, Susan looked at him with an almost expressionless face.
I've already decided to hand our company to someone else. I've been saying for some time now that leaving it to you would risk the livelihoods of our employees.
For someone as responsible as Susan, that would indeed be her greatest fear. Neither Robert nor Susan would want so many people to suffer just for the sake of one person. Since they are both principled individuals, they would never allow such a thing to happen.
That's ridiculous. No one cares more about this company than I do. I'm the most qualified to take over.
All you do is act impulsively, forcing others to clean up your messes afterward.
I was willing to give you the benefit of the doubt because you were trying hard. But now you've spent your time fooling around with young women at work while delivering subpar results. That's unacceptable.
It seemed that Brian's reputation with his parents was even lower than I had imagined. Living with him at home, I had suspected he wasn't particularly capable at work, but I didn't think it was bad enough to make his parents worry about the company's survival. In hindsight, I might have made the right decision by divorcing him. Living with someone like him would inevitably drag me down as well. At worst, I would be the one supporting us financially, while Brian leans on me entirely. As I was thinking about the dreadful future I narrowly avoided, Kate, who was arguably closest to that grim reality, raised her voice.
You've got to be kidding me. I only agreed to date you because you promised I'd get to be the stay-at-home wife of a CEO. If this is how it's going to be, I'm done playing house with an old man.
Well, that reaction was predictable.
Do you know how hard it was to borrow that baby from my relatives? You said everything would work out fine, and now I'm the one left holding the bag. How are you going to fix this?
Hey, do you really have to bring that up here?
It seems that the baby was part of an elaborate ruse concocted by the two of them. This means there is no unfortunate child born from their relationship. At least no real child was involved in this mess, which was a relief. But that didn't mean the rest of this situation could be overlooked. I won't hold your father's company responsible, but I will be suing both of you for damages. I have plenty of evidence from your testimony and the private investigator I hired, so don't think you can deny it. After discovering the hotel's loyalty card, I had hired a private investigator to dig into Brian's affair, even though I was struggling to process everything emotionally. I had already consulted with a lawyer as well.
What? Dad, help me.
Brian turned to his father for help, but Robert's reaction was cold.
We're not bailing you out. This is entirely your doing. You'll have to pay for it yourself. Sell everything you own if you must.
Brian let out an indescribable groan. his face twisting as he frantically looked around the room. Then he turned to me with a pathetic, ingratiating smile.
Let's start over, Mia. I need you. When I become CEO, I'll make your life easy.
The fact that he still thought he'd become CEO was astonishing. And to believe I'd forgive him for everything after all he'd done to me was equally absurd. You seriously think I'd say yes to that? Don't insult me. Every ounce of affection I'd had for him had long since disappeared, thanks to the way he'd treated me. I swatted away his hand as he reached for me, glaring down at him as he sweated nervously.
This has nothing to do with me. You're just a greedy gold digger, trying to take money from him, and now me.
If that's what it takes for you to learn a lesson, so be it. Even as she shouted about her innocence, Kate remained defiant. I wasn't planning on demanding an unreasonable sum from her. However, the best way to ensure they reflect on their actions is to make them pay a substantial amount of money. She would also face repercussions from Brian's family's company, which might make her life more difficult temporarily. Still, she was young enough to rebuild her life. Brian, on the other hand, was a different story.
This is ridiculous. This is all your fault.
Kate snapped, turning her anger toward Brian. Of course, Brian, equally cornered, began to shift the blame back to her. Self-centered individuals like them might work well together in good times, but when things go downhill, the result is always disastrous.
What do you mean, my fault? You were the one who came on to me. Give me back all the money I spent on you.
What? You're the one who pursued me. Don't rewrite history, you old fool. You're delusional if you think you're still young and attractive.
I exchanged glances with my in-laws. The insults they hurled at each other were unbearable.
Nobody would bother with you if you weren't young. You cost a fortune and act like men are obligated to cater to you. You don't even understand the value of things, yet all you want are branded items. You're so stupid, it's ridiculous. Stop acting like a victim all the time.
Stop acting all high and mighty when you can't even do your job. Quit acting like you're doing me a favor just because you spent some money, you miser. All you ever do is brag about yourself, and it's so boring. I'm not stupid. I'm lowering myself to your level. How clueless can you be not to notice? You're the one always playing the victim here.
Their heated exchange was quickly escalating into what looked like a physical fight. At this point, there was nothing more for me. No matter how much they argued, it wouldn't stop me from suing them for damages or prevent Brian's parents from imposing their own penalties. With no desire to watch their ugly bickering any longer, I, along with Robert and Susan, quietly left Brian's house, careful not to let Brian and Kate notice. In the following weeks, I moved back to my family's home and officially filed my claims against both Brian and Kate. Brian ended up leaving his family's company and taking a job elsewhere. His parents initially intended to support him, but after he tarnished the company's reputation and realized he couldn't become CEO, he left home in a fit of anger. Fed up with his selfishness, his parents decided to cut ties with him, saying they had already paid the damages I demanded. Moreover, with his parents pressuring him, Brian had to pay my alimony in a lump sum, leaving his financial situation dire. Having grown accustomed to a privileged lifestyle, it's certain that Brian will face considerable hardships moving forward. Despite this, he still chose to leave his parents' home, proving that his habit of making impulsive decisions without much thought remains unchanged. The company, on the other hand, will be entrusted to a capable employee. A successor has already been selected, and they have willingly accepted the position. Kate also left the company after the scandal made it impossible for her to stay. The damages I claimed from her were minor, and she managed to pay them off by selling the gift she had received from Brian. However, she had spent all her previous earnings, and with Brian no longer bankrolling her lifestyle, she's facing her own financial struggles. Meanwhile, I've secured my divorce from Brian and taken on a management role at my family's company. I've been enjoying my work and living a fulfilling life. My family's business continues to maintain its partnership with Brian's parents' company, and both are thriving. As for marriage, I've had enough for now. I'd rather focus on my career. Unlike Brian, I don't have ambitions of becoming the head of the company. I simply find my work rewarding and enjoyable, which is why I want to keep doing it. Compared to my life with Brian, I feel more vibrant and alive now. I plan to live my life freely, following my own path.